Hi, so hello, my name's Phil Watson. I think I'm about as ordinary a person as you can imagine. I'm married, two kids, live in a Pebble Dash semi-detached house in South Liverpool, just round the corner from Penny Lane that most people around the world have heard of. I'm a teacher. My wife used to work for the council. We got two birth kids. Everything was chugging along very happily. And then my wife kind of one day said, "Shall we foster?" And I went, this sounds a bit male. I kind of went, yeah, all right, let's, well, what? What is it? I mean, I know a bit because I'm a teacher, but my wife took me out on a hot date to a council fostering information event at a local community centre. And sort of sat there with a bunch of other people who were vaguely interested in fostering. As a male, middle-aged male, I was probably in a minority. Mostly it was couples or single women at the time. And the council had a little panel, if you like, of people, and a social worker spoke. And the social worker was just what I thought social workers were like, which is a terrible slur. She spoke in a language that I didn't understand. She kept talking about lax, and I put my hand up because I'm not shy and went, "What is a lac?" And she went, "It's an LAC." And I went, "All right, what is an LAC?" And she went, "It's a looked after child." And I went, "Oh, so the kids are called that." Except they're not called that anymore. They're called children in care. She then started to talk about panel, and I went, "What do you mean? What do you mean by panel?" And she went, "It's a group of people that decide whether you can foster." I went, "Okay." So all the time, jargon that I was not familiar with, and so I would say me and the social worker, we didn't get on particularly well. She was staring at me, and I was staring back, and my wife was elbowing me, going, "Shut up!" And I'm going, "If I'm going to do this, I want to know." Then a fantastic, unbelievable woman spoke to us, and she was a foster carer. And she was probably what I imagined a foster carer to look like. A lady, I'm going to say, in the twilight of middle age, so 50s, and she was incredible. And she basically said, "Hi everybody, I'm knackered. I spent last night chasing a teenager with the police around part of Liverpool because he'd legged it. And we eventually got him back into the car. He was 14, 15 years of age. And when we got him home, I had to call the police again because the other young person that lives with me, who was also in care, had got a boyfriend round, and a boyfriend was not just banned from the house, but he was a convicted drug dealer, and he was banned from the whole postcode. And I was like, "Hang on a minute! So you spent all night chasing a teenager around Liverpool, then you've come home and you've got a drug dealer in your house, and you're trying to convince us to foster and do this? Are you nuts? I'm amazed you do this. I'm really glad you do it. There is not a chance that we are going to open up our semi-detached home. Two kids who were primary school age. We had a guinea pig. We had the whole lot. There's no way we're doing this. Not a chance." But the third person who spoke was a young woman, about 20, who'd been in care. And at the time, people who had been in care were sometimes known as plaques. So she was a lac, and then she became a plaque, previously looked after child. Could you think of a worse name to give a group of people? Or an ex-lac, so she was a former lac. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Anyway, she's now we would probably say care experienced. And she was 20 years of age. She looked at us, we're all 40, 50, 60, I'd say, roughly. Not, you have to be over 21 to foster, but most of us are a bit older. And she said, "Going into care is terrifying. Can you imagine for me if somebody said to you, you need to go and live with a stranger. You're not allowed to take anything with you. You don't know how long it'll be for, and you're never really going to have it fully explained why. If that scares you, imagine that you're then 4 or 5 years of age and that's happened to you." Because going into care is never it's never easy. The reasons for kids going into care normally, not always, but normally there's been some drugs, some alcohol, some violence, some mental health, domestic violence. Sometimes there's prison, sometimes there's bereavement. It's never good reasons, and the number of kids going into care has gone up and up. I think it's probably, don't do me on the numbers, but it's probably doubled in the last 10, 15 years. It's over 80,000 in the UK. In the Northwest, it's particularly high. Liverpool, Blackpool, Blackburn, they're particularly high per head of population. It's like treble or quadruple in Blackpool what it is in a more affluent suburb, in a richer city. So we thought, maybe we should think about this some more. And at the time, our son, birth son, we don't really call him that, we just call him our son, but differentiate sometimes. We said to him, he was going on a sleepover at his best friend's, and I think he was 5, and it was the first time he'd been on a sleepover that wasn't. He wasn't going with his big sister, who was 7, and he wasn't going to a family member, like he wasn't going to a grandparent. He was going to his mate Dan's in a place called Old Swan. And I went, okay, Jamie, so that's my 5-year-old, get everything ready that you think you need to take to this sleepover. And he went, oh, yeah, okay. So he basically emptied his entire bedroom into the hallway. And he went, this is what I need. He's only going for one night. And I went, oh, okay. So it looked like he was moving out. I said, talk me through it then. What's all this then, Jay? And he goes, right, these are all the football tops because we're going to play football in the garden. So he got like every 5-year-old from Liverpool. He was Barcelona, Argentina, Liverpool, Tranmere Rovers. He had the lot. And I went, okay, so you're going to play football. You got your football tops. Then he got his spare clothes in case he got dirty, which made me laugh because he never normally cared about that. He'd got his Star Wars duvet, his R2-D2 pillow. He'd got a massive bag of Power Rangers because they were going to have a Power Ranger battle. He got a big bag of sweets from Home and Bargain. We shoved it all in the car, the Vauxhall Astra, the foster carer's typical vehicle because you can get a load of kids in. And we toddled off to Old Swan. It's about 15 minutes. And on the way there, he's chatting away because he's been chatting with Dan. Oh, when I get there, we're going to play footy in the garden. Then for our tea, we're going to have this because the mum and dad of Dan are our best friends. So our son Jamie has been there all the time. He can't remember not going there. There's 2 other girls, 2 daughters. They're best friends with our daughter. So he was going to a very familiar setting. And they planned what they were going to eat. They planned what they were going to do. They were going to watch like Britain's Got Talent and vote. Then they were going to play with their Power Rangers. Then they were going to build a camp. Then they were going to, eat their sweets in the camp. And but when I dropped him off, he suddenly got that slight wobble that anybody who's got a child or anyone who's been on a sleepover suddenly gets that wobble. And he went, oh, and I went, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And you're only, I'll come and get you in the morning. And if you really, really want to come home, just ask. And Dan's dad will ring me and I'll come and get you. And he had the best time, and I went to get him the next day and it was brilliant. But it made me think, and you can see where this is going, I'm sure. He was going to where he knew, with people he knew what the food was, he knew about the smells, he knew where the toilet was, he knew what the rules were, he knew everything about the place, and he was going for a finite time, one day, one night, not even a day, and he had a get out clause. If he needed to, he could have come home. And I just went home to my wife and I went, yeah, he was a little bit nervous. Can you imagine? I've never been in care. I've got a massive family. Neither's my wife. Can you imagine what it would be like to rock up with strangers who you don't know anything about? You don't know how they live. You don't even know who they are. You don't necessarily understand why you're in care. You don't even know what being in care means because care sounds like a nice word. In care suddenly changes that dynamic. And so we kind of said to ourselves, maybe we could foster. I don't think we could do, absconding teenagers, but let's apply, because if we apply, the only things that can happen are the council, because we applied to our council to foster, they might say, you can't do this, you're not the right people. Or because the process takes maybe 6 months, we might decide halfway through it, and now we know more, we don't want to. Or we might get all the way through, we might get approved, that's the phrase that foster carers use, by this panel of people. And then the adventure will really begin when a child we'll get a social worker ringing us up saying, hi, there's a kid, can I drop them off later today? A few funny stories. I was particularly naive when we first started. So I remember getting a social worker going, right, ringing us up. Normally they'd speak to my wife because she speaks a bit more sense than me and listens properly. And she said, oh, right, there's a 3.5-year-old arriving on Thursday. And we were like, oh, yeah, great. So I got very excited. And I thought, 3.5, okay, we've got birth kids. I remember what that was like. So I got all this Peppa Pig cutlery and crockery from Asda. Sorry to promote Peppa Pig and Asda, but I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of them. So this little kid arrived with a social worker, and our kids were very excited. So they were 6 and 8. They took this 3.5-year-old into the lounge Said, "Oh, we'll watch telly with him while you talk to the social worker." We're like, "Yeah, okay." Anyway, a few minutes later, maybe 10 minutes, my daughter came in where we were chatting to the social worker and said, "He doesn't recognise any telly, any TV at all. We've been through every channel." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, maybe there was no TV where he lived." But anyway, let's have tea. And so they came into where we kind of eat tea. The room I'm in now, it's like a big kitchen area. The social worker got off, left. And so suddenly you realize that, right, we've got this 3.5-year-old and we don't know much about him. I mean, because they don't know what there is to say about him. They don't come with a manual with children. Every parent knows that. So anyway, I said to this little boy, who so far had said not one word, "We've set this place for you at the table, and it's Peppa Pig. Look at this bowl. It's Peppa's bowl." And I was trying to be the daddy pig voice. And this kid stared at the floor. And then I went, "Oh, right." And then we were having like, pasta shapes and spaghetti, kind of like, spaghetti bolognese, sort of. And I went, "Oh, do you like spaghetti bolognese?" Nothing, not a flicker of interest. Kids staring at the floor. So we were looking at each other going, "What should we do?" I went, "Oh, maybe he doesn't like spaghetti bolognese." So we went to the cupboard and we got everything out and we went, "Do you like this?" And we're like, do you like beans? Do you like chips? Do you like crisps? Do you like biscuits? Do you like bread? And we'd like, "Is there anything? We will give you anything that you recognize." This kid just stared at the floor. And you're thinking, well, what do we do? And there is no answer. Nobody knows. This child is 3.5. He just come from birth family that day, I think, or maybe the day before. And so we just went, well, let's have tea and see what happens. So we started to eat our tea. We had our spaghetti bolognese. This little boy stood in the kitchen staring at the floor. And we were thinking, well, is he very autistic? Is he traumatized? Well, I don't know. Anyway, our birth kids then cleared off to watch more TV or go and do what they were doing. And this little boy was still stood there staring at the floor in our kitchen, maybe 20 minutes or so. And so me and my wife were clearing up, kind of giving each other eye rolling of like, what do we do? What happened? Who do we ring? Where's the hotline? Hi, we've got a child staring at the floor. What's the solution? But while we were tidying up, with our backs turned to him, we suddenly sensed he moved, and he'd moved from where he was stood, and he opened our fridge, which is like one of them posh integrated ones. You can't tell it's a fridge unless you're clever. He took out a full 4 pint of milk, and it was still sealed, never been used. And he bit the plastic off, and he bit the foil off, and he started to glug it down like glug, glug, glug. And it went all over him and all over the floor. And me and my wife, even though we were highly trained foster carers, just froze and went, Anyway, our son, who was, say, 6 or 7, came in and he said to this little kid, "Oh, in our house, we've got cups," which we probably should have said. Took a cup out of the cupboard, took the milk off this little boy, poured it into the cup, showed him how to drink, handed it back to the little boy, and the little boy copied him. He just copied him, and he started to drink out of the cup. Now it all went down the sides of his, mouth, but he basically drank from the cup. And we had a kind of amazing Damascus moment of, oh, right, okay. So this kid doesn't know what a cup is until our son showed him. This kid doesn't know about sitting at tables and cups and Peppa Pig and bowls and spoons and forks. And we worked out in the first few hours of him living with us, he didn't know what a bath was. He had no idea what hot running water was or cold running water. He had no idea about TV. He had no idea about beds and duvets. And we think, because we reckon he'd been watching us and he'd spotted we were going to this place where the milk was, the fridge. So there must have been milk where he had grown up or where he'd been. And we went, okay, so he somehow lived by finding milk or drinking milk. And in the next 24 hours, we found out a lot more about him. So, for example, I took him, we live right by Penny Lane, and I took him down Penny Lane on a walk. And we ended up in the park at the end of Penny Lane. And he suddenly, he really hadn't said a word yet. He suddenly went crazy, screaming the word Dippy, Dippy. And I was looking around the park going, what looks like it could be called Dippy? And then I realized it was a chippy. Somebody had a chippy tea, and I went, oh, it's a chippy tea. He's recognized a chippy tea. So I ran into this cafe with this little 3.5-year-old. He was screaming his head off, going, Dippy, Dippy, Dippy. kind of pushed my way to the front of the queue, to be fair, threw all the money I had at the lady in the chippy in the cafe and went, I need chips now. And she gave me a portion of chips, which I handed to this screaming child. And as soon as he got them in his hand, he went dead quiet. And I went, phew. And then I realized the whole cafe was looking at me. And I'm reckoning, I'm not a mind reader, but I'm figuring half the cafe were going, look at that crap dad giving in to that tantrum. He hasn't got a clue. I bet he's one of them single divorced dads just looking after a child on a Saturday. What a rubbish idiot. And I reckon the other half of the cafe were going, thank goodness it was that man having a kick off with his kid and not me. Anyway, I just thought none of you've got a clue what you're watching here because you don't know that I don't know this child. I've only known him 24 hours. So anyway, I went home and I went to my wife, took it, we carried these chips home. And went, guess what? I found something out. He knows what chips are. And my wife went, we showed him chips. I went, no, we didn't. We showed him frozen McCain's chips. That's not what chips look like. Chips look like they've come in a paper bag and they're cooked and they smell. And so we worked out, and it went, right, okay, so he knows what chips are. And we worked out that he knew what sausage rolls were and pasties and hot dogs. So if it was a takeaway food cooked in a bag, he knew what it was and he would eat it. And we were finding all this out. And when you're a foster carer, you do daily records. You're kind of like a reporting mechanism for the social workers and for the courts. So you're filling all these forms in saying, child appeared to not recognize duvet, bed, sofa, television, any TV channel, warm running water. Child knew what milk was, and you'd explain all these stories, and this is giving an insight. So you're thinking, right, where has this child been where there was no food that would be, shall we say, suitable or appropriate for a toddler? Where was this child where he thought when it was bedtime he just climbed, where he just lay on the floor under his coat, and you're going, right, this is not what you're meant to be like as a 3.5-year-old. Poor educational outcomes, they're more likely to get fewer GCSEs, more likely to be excluded. They're much more likely to end up homeless. They're much more likely to end up in prison. And there's a big move to make care experience a protected characteristic. And I can't quite get my head around what that means, but I do know that there's a few myths. One is if you remove a child early enough, there's no damage done, and that isn't true. The removal of a child from birth mother is traumatic, and trauma happens in the gestation period in utero, especially if there's violence and alcohol and drugs. So removing a child early is better, but it doesn't mean that this child will have no memory. The body keeps the score, is the phrase. And we always say in fostering and adoption, we count the first 1,000 days as crucial, but we count them from conception, not from birth. So we don't, you're not 3, you're 2. So there's that aspect, but also as a protected characteristic, adoption doesn't solve trauma. It's not like, oh, it's not little orphan Annie and then there's all singing and dancing. It's just not the case. And I know often in the media, the shocking stories of children that were taken from mothers whose only crime, if you like, was they were unmarried or unwed, back in the day, 50s, 60s, 70s, although that still happened in the 80s and even the 90s. That's a terrible thing. But the children that we take away from birth parents now tend to have been through massive amounts of trauma. It's absolutely not their fault. And they need a lot of our love and our care and our patience and maybe all sorts of counseling. And there's all sorts of therapy that you can get. Because these are just they're just kids. They're just people. And they need our help. And I believe, deep down, that trauma can be healed, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. Probably families are the best place for that to happen. I keep coming back to that. And a family can look like ours, say dead boring, mum, dad, 2 kids, pebble dash, semi-detached compost bin, but it could be a single person. It could be a gay couple. It could be any, families come in all shapes and sizes. So don't think nuclear, don't think bog standard. And that's where a lot of I'm going to say the healing takes place, which is just actually being safe,